Welcome into Always the Jags. As I mentioned before on my previous podcast, I know it's been a little while since I have last posted, so I'm trying to get back into it. I took that loss really hard last year, and I couldn't even watch the whole game because I have red zone and I couldn't even see it happen in real time. But it just, I was like done with Jaguar stuff for a while. But I'm back. I know I did a mock draft, and this episode will probably come out after I do my draft grades. So right now I'm going to do the off-season grades, which I didn't get a chance to do earlier, where I'm gonna talk about some of the moves that we made in the off-season and whether I like them or not, and see kind of some of the key departures that we ended up losing. So one of my favorite moves in the offseason was the signing of Mitch Morse. We signed him up for a 2-year deal worth 10 million, which makes a lot of sense. We needed to bring in competition for Luke Fortner, and this is the kind of competition that's not really going to end up being a competition because I think Mitch Morse is just a better player than Luke Fortner. Like Mitch Morse is going to end up being our starting center, and maybe Luke Fortner can learn from him and get better. But like that game where we stopped playing for the Jaguar, or not stop playing for the Jaguars, where the Titans game where I fell off super hard of doing my podcast because we lost a game that we should have won that would have taken us into the playoffs. Fortner got beat before the play had even begun. Like he was already knocked over. The backfield was already blown up because he couldn't get his block. And that's the kind of thing that Mitch Morse, while he's not going to be like the most powerful center, like he's not going to be probably the people mover that some other great centers are out there. The guy for the Ravens, Tyler Linderbaum. Mitch Morse is not going to get beat that quickly, right? And so to pick up a yard, Mitch Morse can at least move a guy to pick up a yard, or he's not going to allow himself to get knocked over on the very first play. Like you said, he may not move the guy for that long. He may not be blowing open holes, but he's not going to get beaten within a millisecond. So that's why I'm really excited to bring in Mitch Morse. I think it'll stabilize a lot of the line. It'll allow Brandon Scherf to not have to double team every guy with Fortner. It'll allow Cleveland again to not have to double team every guy with Fortner. Because there are some. I think Mitch Morse will still need help against some of the top tier defensive tackles. But when he's going against lesser ones, I think he'll be able to hold his own. So, and again, Fortner was the worst graded center last year. So it's kind of like all you can do is go up. So I'm very glad that we signed Mitch Morse after Buffalo released him. And the center market wasn't very strong. So he got released and snatched up and we got him on a very team friendly deal. So like I said, he was 14th among centers in pass block win rate. I mean, that alone is a huge difference compared to Luke Fortner. Like I said, so it's not going to make our offensive line amazing, but it will be better, much better. Um, Probably my favorite move though, because like I said, that was one of my favorites. My favorite move was probably adding Eric Armstead. So Eric Armstead is one of the most dominant defensive linemen over the past few seasons. Last year, it is risky because last year he was hurt. He didn't play a lot of games, only in 6 games. And he so far has still been on the physically unable to perform list for a good part of the season. So it's kind of hard to evaluate him. But I think we had money tucked away for Calvin Ridley. We had money tucked away for Calvin Ridley, and I think that money went to signing Eric Armstead. And based upon what Calvin Ridley got, I think we were trying to get him 20 million a year, and how he ended up going for 23. We got Eric Armstead for a 3-year, $51 million deal. So we were able to commit a lesser amount of time and a lesser amount of money, which means less of a cap space. And I think Eric Armstead is going to make a bigger impact on our team than drafting a defensive tackle in the first round. Because again, I feel like we need more leaders in our defensive room, more guys that can kind of step up, especially on that defensive line. Because Josh Allen is a leader, but he's kind of transitioning into a leader role. Eric Armstead is like a 10-year veteran. I'm not going to say this could be like Calais Campbell 2.0, but if it's anything close to that, it'll be a great boon for our defense. And it fixes a lot of our run game issues. Right now, we're having a terrible time stopping the run, even watching the preseason. Now, Eric Armstead hasn't played all preseason, so I don't know if he's just going to magically fix that or if he's going to play in the nose tackle role. But I think he's going to really, really help because not only can he press the pocket, but he's also really good at run defense. And he knows that Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker can get to the quarterback with 27 sacks last year. So like I'm not even worried about how many sacks does Eric Armstead bring in. I'm just Eric Armstead will prevent teams from double teaming Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. That's what I want from Eric Armstead because you can't put your worst player, your worst guard on Eric Armstead. He will probably lose. So you now you have to watch out for all three of them. So like I said, I think Eric Armstead, like him having a successful season in Jacksonville is improving our run defense and pushing the pocket. He doesn't have to get 10 sacks. He doesn't have to get 15 sacks. He sack numbers I don't think are really going to determine his success, which is why I think this is my favorite move because the Jaguars know why they brought him in to open up things for Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker, push that pocket and make it harder for the quarterback to be able to read. So like again, you still want to get pressure, I should say, but we're not going to be counting his sacks as a successful season. A successful season is did he help our run defense and is he helping us get more pressure? And so because of that, while it's hard to imagine Josh Allen, hitting that 17 sacks again because it's hard to hit that mark once you've already hit it. Sometimes it can just kind of be lightning in a bottle. But I have no doubt that Trayvon Walker will probably get more sacks. And if Trayvon Walker starts to sniff 15, and his deal is going to be up, sooner than later, which is crazy to think about because it feels like we just drafted him. It's a good problem to have. I mean, having a guy that's that good and needing to pay him now, that's a much better problem to have than having a bust. So I think it's going to make it more effective. And I think it allowed us to not have to draft a defensive lineman. And I feel like defensive players don't like offensive players in the first round are always more likely to make an impact than defensive players, I feel like. Like there are some defensive players who are good right out of college, Sauce Gardner, stuff like that, guys like that. But for a lot of them, even like Derek Stingley, like now he's making his way up to the top of the top quarters, but his rookie season, he didn't really make that much of an impact. He wasn't that good. It took time. Defensively, it takes time to develop to the defense of the NFL. So I think especially if we're looking for immediate impact, like Eric Armstead's impact is going to be immediate. And again, it's going to go down. Like he's not going to impact us as much later on. But I also think who we ended up getting, Brian Thomas Jr., is going to be impactful. I think he's going to be more impactful than any of the first round defensive tackles would have been. So I think that's why this is my favorite move. Going on, we got another former Bills player with Gabe Davis. Jaguars signed him to a 3-year, $39 million contract with $11 million in signing. He's a big play receiver. He can stretch the field. He can win 50-50 balls, do those contested catches. So he's kind of like the Jaguars have never really had like big that big of a guy, who Trevor Lawrence could throw a contested catch ball. Because Christian Kirk is kind of more of a shifty guy who gets open. And Calvin Ridley isn't really a contested catch guy. He's kind of also like a fast, shifty guy who can get open. He's really good at route running. That's always been his thing. So with Gabe Davis, we get a guy who is fast. He can stretch the field for us, which is what we're really going to need. And he can kind of be like a number two receiver. Like this isn't what wide receiver one money. I think it's tough because it's like Gabe Davis had a chance to he's taken over games before. He had a game with 4 touchdowns with Josh Allen, and it looked like he was going to kind of be the wide receiver two next to Stephon Diggs. But there are games where Gabe Davis, depending on the cornerback, he would just disappear. Even if Stephon Diggs was blanketed, Gabe Davis would just kind of disappear. So he was always very like hot and cold. So this contract is pretty high for a player like that. However, I think based upon the fact that we drafted Brian Thomas Jr., because again, with the Bills, you had Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis and no one else. So I think it's going to be much harder for stuff in our 3 receiver sets. It's going to be much harder for Gabe Davis to disappear when guys have to worry about Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. Because again, it's not about like now you have 3 guys you have to defend instead of 2. So depending on which corner, so like if Gabe Davis disappears, that means they've got a really good corner on him, and that means that Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas can eat. You know what I mean? Same thing for so on the games where Gabe Davis doesn't disappear, it means they put their best corner on Thomas Jr. or on Christian Kirk, which means Gabe Davis will now be able to eat. you know. So I think he's kind of a good shot to get 1,000 yards. Like if he ends up getting 1,000 yards or somewhere close to Zay Jones, what Zay Jones got, I think he's a good replacement for Zay Jones, and I think he's been a lot healthier than Zay Jones has been. So if he gets anywhere close to 1,000 yards, maybe even close to 800, this will look like a bargain. It'll look like if he gets 900, he'll look like a bargain for this price. And I think he has a very realistic chance of doing that. I think all three of our receivers have a good chance of going over 1,000 this year, but we got to be able to protect Trevor in the middle, which is why Mitch Morse was such a great signing. So some of our other signings, we re-signed Ezra Cleveland, bringing him back. He's not like I feel like we didn't like the Jaguars are really banking on the offensive line couldn't gel because they couldn't play together. And it's hard to evaluate their individual skill when they haven't had because they were hurt all year, and it was hard to evaluate are they playing well together, what's going on because they hadn't got a chance to play together. So that makes it really tough for you as a offensive line coach or a coach to evaluate who's doing well and who's not doing so well. So that's what makes it. So I think re-signing Ezra Cleveland wasn't a bad move. I think he's gonna have some good I think he's gonna have some good games. The contract wasn't bad either. It's not like we're locked in for a long time. At first, I thought it was going to be pretty high, but it ended up being. I think that was just like the what it could be. I think it's like a seven. It's like a six per year deal over 3 years. So it's like a $24 million deal, which is not bad for a guard. And Ezra Cleveland is a starting guard. It's just we'll really have to see how much does Mitch Morse fortify it. And now based upon our draft, I would have preferred if we had some more guys that we kind of drafted to go behind them, like Tanner Bortolini, someone like that who can kind of develop and maybe take over or step in if his play proves to be ineffective. But Ezra Cleveland, like I said, it's hard to evaluate. It's just this kind of where I did kind of like the move when Trent Baalke made it at the end of last year, and it kind of makes that 6 round pick like mean something. But I'm hoping that he wasn't just doubling down on a poor decision. That's the only thing I'm hoping for. So we'll see. Darnell Savage came in. Um, this one was an okay signing. I guess he's going to play the nickel. Because I don't think the Jaguars felt like Antonio. I think they want Antonio Johnson to start, but like a lot of Jaguars fans were excited because they wanted Antonio Johnson to kind of play a Kyle Hamilton role. And I agreed with that too. But again, this is something that would have been solved if last year, instead of drafting Brenton Strange, if we had traded up and got Brian Branch, we wouldn't have this problem. He would be our starting nickel, and Brian Branch would probably be playing safety, and then he would probably move up to the nickel, just like the Ravens do with Kyle Hamilton. So they keep one of their best players on the field at all times. So with Darnell Savage, it's kind of like I think he's going to end up playing the slot, is what they're saying, and he did play a lot of nickel. I think Antonio Johnson though was really good in the nickel, and I really love to see him there. But I think he's also good at safety. I would love to see him play that Kyle Hamilton role. But I guess we don't really know. I guess the Jaguars aren't really sure if he can do that, and they probably don't want to put too much on his plate, which is understandable. It's just Darnell Savage, and it wasn't like a huge deal. It kind of makes me reflect more back on the draft because again, based upon the way the draft went down, we could have had Bryant Branch and Darnell Washington. And if we had both of those guys and we had drafted Antonio Johnson, in the 6th round, which still would have been a great idea, we wouldn't even be talking about Darnell Savage or having to sign him because we would have had Cisco, Branch, and Johnson, which would have made a great trio. Now, maybe Johnson wouldn't have been there if we were the ones who took Branch, but he lasted all the way to the 6th round. So it's hard to imagine. Like we could have even taken him in the 5th, and that would have been fine. So I guess we'll see. We got Joey Sly, a kicker who has already been released because Cam Little has been so much better. Dearness Johnson, the running back, we re-signed him to bring him back. I'm surprised he didn't get more looks because he constantly showed out with the Browns, but he hasn't really been as significant with us. Um, so we'll see if he can kind of um we'll see if he ends up making the roster again. Tank Bigsby showed out a lot in preseason, and Dearness Johnson had some nice plays, but he didn't exactly showed out. Didn't exactly show out. So I could see him like based upon Jackson, that kid who was just pinballing off of guys. I could see our depth chart being um, ETN, Bigsby, and then Jackson, and then um, Dearness Johnson. He could end up being our fourth running back, which again wouldn't be bad. But I could see that happening with the depth chart. And so if we decide, so it kind of depends if we decide to keep four running backs, which I think we will. I think we'll keep four running backs. I think we'll probably end up keeping four. We'll probably end up keeping four running backs, maybe three or four tight ends, and then probably four I six wide receivers is probably where we're going to end up with. So I'll probably do a depth chart preview, but I'm going to wait till after the Atlanta Falcons game for my prediction on our depth chart. We also signed Jeremiah Ledbetter. He was on a pretty good, he was a pretty good rotational player for us in our defensive line. So we kind of wanted to keep him around, which kind of makes sense. You get him a nice extension. It's probably not going to expand as much as it has, but he's been a solid run defender. And I think he just, in a less featured role, he'll really get a chance to shine. Because I think he was, I hate to say on the field a little bit too much, but guys can get tired, and he was signed as a depth guy who ended up playing a lot because we had a lot of defensive line injuries. So in theory, again, he'll be a rotational guy that we can kind of bring in. That will kind of help. Ronald Darby is who we signed at outside corner, which was a good signing. He can he can get hurt sometimes, and he's not the best cornerback too. I think he's very, very solid. And we got him for a really nice price. And he can play inside or outside. So if another guy challenges for that outside slot, you can slide Darby inside. But he's probably going to be starting out with Tyson Campbell. Now, the thing is, again, it feels like a band-aid. Like it feels like this is a one-year solution. So it's like next year, who's going to be our starting outside cornerback next to Tyson Campbell? So we ended up not picking a cornerback in the first round, cornerback in the first round, which was fine because again, my original, I would have went cornerback and then I would have picked Xavier Legette, from South Carolina in the second round, but he ended up not making it out of the first. So, them picking Brian Thomas Jr. ended up being the right choice because those wide receivers, Legette wouldn't have been there. The Panthers were going to have him. They they knew that they wanted him, and there was no way going to let him go. And there were a lot of wide receiver needy teams, Bills, Chargers, that were picking in those later rounds. So it would have been nice if Rome Odunze had fallen all the way to us. I mean, but the Bears were always going to take him. That was kind of a sodium fact. So anyway, so now we're back to Darby, which was a good signing before the draft to kind of make sure, just in case we don't end up getting that guy that we want. And so I think he'll be a good replacement. A lot of people thought that Gabe Davis was going to kind of replace Calvin Ridley. And it's like, in a way, he is, but also not quite. So I think it's a good move. I just like what I would love to see, especially because I think the Jaguars were going to draft a cornerback in the second round. I am 100% certain that if Kool-Aid McKinstry was on there, they would have taken him and letting him compete for the cornerback 2 spot, maybe even the cornerback 1 spot. That didn't happen because the Saints sniped us and got him. But what that does mean is now the Saints seem to have like 4 starting corners if they want to start Kool-Aid McKinstry. So that means one of them might be available. Who's probably going to be available? The one with the biggest cap hit, Marshawn Lattimore. So if I'm the Jaguars, I'm sniffing around. Maybe this might end up being like a mid-season thing. But I would sniff around and try to send a fourth for Marshawn Lattimore. Because right now it feels like we have 2 cornerbacks as our starters who kind of get hurt a lot. And we have enough cap space to take on Marshawn Lattimore's contract for the next couple of years. And I feel like if we bring him in, that will really stabilize that room. Because right now, if Campbell goes down, we are really, really, really stressed out because Darby would have to move to the cornerback 1 role, which is going to be very tough for him to do. And then we'd have to bring up one of these other guys to move into the cornerback 2 role, who, and a lot of them still need time to develop. So I think that would be the move to kind of solidify that room. I think no matter what, we should have signed Darby. But I think to really solidify that room, especially with how hurt they get, I would love to see him send a fourth for a starting top tier corner like Marshawn Lattimore. Again, we got the cap space to do it. I know we just signed Trevor to a big extension, but by the time that extension kicks in, Lattimore probably won't be here anymore. He'll hit free agency, and then we'll get a comp pick. So that's what I would love to see. That's what I still think we should do. That's like the missing piece of our offseason. Then Devin Duvernay was a great signing to kind of replace Jamal Agnew. I loved Jamal Agnew. I think he's better than Devin Duvernay, but he's been hurt a lot. So we can't really see how much better he is when he's always hurt. So, and Parker Washington stepped in as a fantastic punt returner and did a fantastic return during that one preseason game. So it kind of feels like we have our two guys that we need right there with Duvernay and Parker Washington, because now you need two returners. But I think Duvernay was a good signing. It was solid. And he had a nice catch. Like, he's going to step right into Jamal Agnew's role. I like the way Jamal Agnew fit into our team. And had he been able to stay healthy, we probably would have re-signed him instead. But Duvernay ends up coming in to kind of take on that Jamal Agnew role. And I think he'll be great as like the fourth or fifth receiver as well. He can step in, make a play or two. Because at one point he was like one of the Ravens' top two receivers until they brought in all these other guys. So yeah, we'll see. I think he's definitely got a chance to make an impact. Travis Gibson is kind of a rotational pass rusher that we signed. Um, he's a very low risk guy. He doesn't really have. I think he has like 13 career sacks in 48 games, but he had 7 in 2021 with Chicago, which was is pretty good to get 7 out of your rotational guy. Um, but that was back in 2021. And we're in 2024. So, maybe he'll be effective, as effective as he was, because that was back when the Bears had Robert Quinn. And when they had Robert Quinn, he got 18 and a half sacks, second in the NFL. Gibson was able to take a lot of those opportunities that teams were keying into Robert Quinn. But in this case, I'm not sure how effective he'll be as a third pass rusher. I still was okay with bringing him in, but I also would have liked to drafted a third pass rusher guy who could have really competed with him, like Javon Solomon. And we ended up drafting Miles Cole, who again is going to kind of be a not a risk to make the team, but like he's going to try to make the team, but we don't know if he's going to or not. So it's kind of unsure right now. So I don't think it's a bad move. It's just one of those moves. It's like it doesn't really move the needle as much as we probably needed to. Because again, Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen had 27 sacks. As a team, we had 40. Like, we had a guy on our team who got 17 sacks, and still we only have 40 as a team. So it's like we kind of it kind of feels like we would need to bring in a guy who can kind of help, get some of those other sacks while teams are teeing up on Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen. I know Hassan Reddick is requesting a trade because I guess he doesn't want to be on the Jets anymore. And that kind of feels more like a luxury move that I don't know if I think I would rather make. I don't think there's room to make that move and the Marshawn Lattimore move. And I would rather make the Marshawn Lattimore move, if both of those are options. I think because Hassan Reddick would completely transform our pass rush, just because you take a guy who got 16 sacks consistently for the Eagles, and then you unleash him on our team. I think that would be fantastic. But I think more than likely Hassan Reddick will end up going to a team like, the Panthers or something like that, who really need a pass rusher. And ironically, he played for the Panthers for a while. So, but then again, I'm not sure why he doesn't want to be on the Jets. Maybe they don't want to give him a new contract or something. But I don't think we're going to end up doing that. And I don't think we really, really need like a big name guy to come in to help our pass rush. I think I would just love to draft somebody who could kind of develop into that. Like I said, Javon Solomon would have been my guy. As well as we need someone who can. I think fortifying our cornerback room is more important than our edge room right now, just because the top two guys we have are often injured. are often injured. So Blake Hance, we signed, he's a backup offensive lineman. Daniel Thomas, again, core special teamer. So those are all kind of all the offseason moves. So overall, I think it was a very solid offseason. Many people are looking at the Jaguars and wondering, like, did they really upgrade because they seem to have swapped out a lot of players for players who aren't that different. Like, again, we got rid of Darius Williams and brought in Ronald Darby. It's like, okay, was that really an upgrade? We got rid of, like, those players kind of seem almost equal. But again, Darby is a lot cheaper than Darius Williams. And Darius Williams had a fantastic season. And I think he'll be a really good cornerback too for, the Rams where he ended up going. Um, like I said, to me, that move makes the most sense if we're able to get. I think we made that move in mind with drafting a corner. And in that case, Darby makes sense because he can kind of be the incumbent. But we ended up getting sniped. So now I think that move makes the most sense if you give that fourth, maybe even a fifth. Like I said, we have an extra fourth now because we traded back with the Vikings. But if you can do it for a fifth, that works too. I mean, obviously, that's much better for us to bring in someone like Marshawn Lattimore, but that might be like a mid-season thing where the Saints feel like Kool-Aid McKinstry is good enough to start playing. So that's all that's all speculation for right now. So we'll have to see. But and again, safety. Like we got rid of Rayshawn Jenkins because again, he was a hard hitter. But he also had some lapses in coverage. And so I think Antonio Johnson, there's not much of a drop off there. And I think that was more about just letting our younger guy come in than really trying to replace him with Darnell Savage. Because again, Darnell Savage is going to end up playing the slot. Or maybe they'll start using Johnson in that dual role, have him play safety and play the slot in nickel downs, and we'll just use Darnell Savage at safety when Antonio Johnson is playing the slot. So maybe we'll still do that, but from what Doug Peterson says, it sounds like he wants Savage to play the slot. So that wasn't really a replacement of Rayshawn Jenkins necessarily. And again, most people look at the Gabe Davis for Calvin Ridley. That feels like a downgrade, and especially looking at their contracts. Again, Gabe Davis is getting $13 million a year. Calvin Ridley's getting $23 million a year. But I don't think I would have paid Calvin Ridley $23 million a year because he was very good for us, but he also like kind of lost us a lot of games. Like, and again, he won us a lot of games. So it's kind of very tough because it's like the consistency wasn't there enough, but because he was such a feature part of the offense, you kind of need to be that consistent if you're going to play that role in the offense. Like again, there were times where like he wasn't in the right spot against the Browns game, and I don't know if he and Trevor got confused. Maybe it was Trevor's fault, but this seems to never happen when he throws to Christian Kirk, right? And so he threw it and it got picked off because Calvin Ridley wasn't at the spot he thought it was going to be. And then we had that infamous fourth down play against the Titans. Calvin Ridley dropped the ball. But that's also the same game where Calvin Ridley caught that really long touchdown. So it's like, again, do you play 23 million to a guy that you don't know if he's going to win you the game or lose you the game? So I think Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis are much better pairing. I think that's an upgrade over Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley because I think Calvin Ridley was at his most effective when Christian Kirk and Zay Jones were on the field, and that didn't happen a lot because as soon as we got Zay Jones back, Christian Kirk went down. So with these guys, and of course these guys can get hurt too. I mean, no one's immune to injuries. But I think Gabe Davis is an improvement over Zay Jones. And I think what that makes up for, I think Brian Thomas Jr. will catch up to Calvin Ridley. So overall, it's a good offseason. I like it. I like a lot of our moves. I think the only thing missing that I would really love to cap off, especially because the Texans went and traded for Stephon Diggs, um, I think I would love to see that Marshawn Lattimore move. Because to me, a cornerback was one of those things. And like, even if we didn't go get Marshawn Lattimore, like the Titans went out and got L'Jarius Sneed for like a third and a fifth. And I would have been totally okay with giving that up in this year's draft to bring in L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, because he's been one of the top guys. And to me, I mean, a third and a fifth it's a little high compared to just giving a fourth. Because that's two picks compared to just one. But and based upon who we ended up drafting in those two spots, I think there were better players available. But if you told me that instead of Jerry and Jones and I guess who because we had 2 5th-round picks. So and if you told me instead of Jerry and Jones and whoever the other 5th-round pick was, it was either Keelan Robinson, um, if you told or DeAndre Prince, yeah. If you told me that instead of the 2 cornerbacks that we drafted, Jerry and Jones and DeAndre Prince, that we had L'Jarius Sneed, I think most Jaguars fans would have accepted that happily instead of taking 2 guys that may or may not develop. Let's go ahead and get. And the contract that he got, I mean, 19 million is a lot, I guess. And then we ended up paying Tyson Campbell this offseason and gave him 19 million. To me, I probably would have, like, if I was the GM, I probably would have traded for Snead and let him and Tyson Campbell battle it out for the QB1 role. Um, Maybe even instead of signing Darby. And then whoever becomes cornerback one, kind of gets that contract. Because Tyson Campbell, again, I feel like he can be a dominant cornerback too. So that kind of feels like a missed opportunity to me. Um, and again, had we done that, I would have been ecstatic. Because again, L'Jarius Sneed, he's just a very smart player. He may not be the most he feels like a lockdown corner, but he's never made a Pro Bowl. But he feels like a very smart player. So if you told me that was the deal that could have brought him to Jacksonville, um, I definitely would have done that. And then to me, we wouldn't have had to sign Ronald Darby. I would have given him that extension and Tyson Campbell. Tyson Campbell would have gotten an extension too, but it probably would have been closer to like 12 or 13 million as our cornerback too. That's probably what the extension would have been seeming like. So again, it kind of feels like a missed opportunity, but it is what it is. It also kind of hurts that it was a division rival that did it, but again, I suppose it is what it is. So those are my offseason grades. I think overall I'd give Baalke with the draft and everything combined, I probably end up giving him like a B or so. Because I think the Eric Armstead move and Mitch Morse move are A+ moves. I think a little bit more aggression in the trade front could have saved us money now and in the future. You know what I mean? Like I think we could have saved on like if we went and got Snead, I think we could have saved because again, you don't need to sign Darby if you get Snead. You don't really need to sign Savage if you get Snead. Um, and Tyson Campbell probably won't get signed for as much if you sign Snead. So based upon those moves, I think being a little more aggressive in that front because he probably didn't want to do it because it's too expensive. But then it's like, okay, you look up all the pieces that you added, and it's still going to end up being kind of that same expense. So those are kind of my top picks for the off season. After this next preseason game, I'm gonna drop my Jaguars predictions for the year, and I'm gonna drop every team's prediction that I have for the year, how well I think they're gonna do this season. So yeah, stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for joining me on Always the Jags. And again, I'm gonna get back to posting these every single week. I think Thursdays is the day I'm gonna be aiming for. And yeah, never forget, it was always the Jags.